Hey Manna students, Mackenzie here, welcoming you into the year of 2021. We are back with our very first week of our brand new series for the month, but our very first series of the year. It is called Waitlisted. And for the next few weeks, we're going to be talking a lot about waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. I think we can all agree that waiting is not fun, especially when we're in line at an amusement park, when we're waiting for Christmas to come, which we have a whole year left now, when we're waiting to turn 18 and to graduate and become our own adult, when we're waiting at the Starbucks line, or we're waiting to go on vacation. My least favorite is waiting in line at an amusement park. I love amusement parks, but if you think about it, you spend about 75% of the time at an amusement park in line waiting for a ride. Blows my mind. I think we can all agree that waiting isn't fun, even if it is waiting in line at an amusement park. But my question to you is, have you ever waited for a marshmallow? There was a study done in the 1970s by Stanford that had to do with marshmallows. So a kid was given a marshmallow and they were told that they could eat the marshmallow, but if they waited and that they didn't eat the marshmallow immediately, they could have 2 marshmallows later. The kids in the experiment were then tracked over the course of years to see what kinds of decisions they would make as they got older. And the goal of this study was to see if kids who waited for the second marshmallow had better lives and made better decisions than those kids who couldn't wait. The experiment had many mixed results and its conclusions were pretty hotly debated, but it is so well known that it is often remixed and parodied. The conclusion of the experiment was controversial because the designers of the original study thought that they had everything figured out. They thought when a kid had waited for the second marshmallow, they believed it was because that kid had greater self-control and would grow up to make better decisions and have a more successful life. But in later versions of the experiment, something important was discovered. Many kids in the study ate the first marshmallow, not because they were impatient, but because they didn't believe that the strange adult in the room would follow through on their promise to give them a second marshmallow later. For many of the kids in the study, their decision not to wait for the second marshmallow wasn't based on a lack of self-control, but actually on a lack of trust. Has anyone ever made you a promise that you then had to wait for? Maybe they promised to give you something, do something for you, help you with something, or simply show up and spend time with you. At first, the waiting is kind of fun, right? You know, that anticipation builds. But when the waiting is finally over, you know you're going to get the thing you've been waiting for. What happens though when that thing you're waiting for continuously gets delayed and delayed again and again and again, and you're left waiting, waiting, and waiting? Soon you start to wonder if it's ever going to happen at all, or if you should just give up hope. It's a feeling a lot of us can identify with, and for some of us, it's because we've been waiting on God. Waiting on a promise places us somewhere between now and not yet. While we wait, a lot can happen. We might get frustrated and ask questions, wonder if the person who made the promise can really be trusted, and we might even be tempted to give up hope. When we're waiting, we're waiting for God to fulfill the promise, we might wonder, can God really be trusted? Does God actually care? Can God even see me? Or this one, if God really loves me, why do I have to wait so long? If you feel like you're waiting on God right now, the good news is you're not alone. The Bible is filled with stories of people who had to wait on God for a really long time. Throughout this series, we're going to be looking at some pretty popular Bible stories that you may have heard before, but we're going to be diving in a little bit deeper into these stories than normal. So this very first week, we're going to be looking at Abraham and Sarah. Abraham is the father of Judaism and Christianity. He's the guy God worked with thousands of years ago in order to set a huge plan and promise in motion. He's the guy that God worked with thousands of years ago in order to set a huge plan and promise in motion. In Genesis 12, 1-3, we read, "The Lord had said to Abraham, 'Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all the peoples on the earth will be blessed through you. Abraham was an ordinary guy, but this was not an ordinary promise. This was a big promise for Abraham. In those times, having children was seen as a sign of God's blessing. So when God promised Abraham a son, it was one of the greatest promises that Abraham could have received. This was also a big promise for the world. God promised to make Abraham's descendants God's special and chosen people, the people whom God would work through, and God would be revealed throughout the world through these people. But there was a problem. Abraham didn't have any descendants, and his wife Sarah was unable to have children, and they were both pretty old, so the prospects of them having kids seemed unlikely. Abraham and Sarah obeyed God by packing up their lives and hitting the road. But what about that promise about the babies? That was hard for them to trust. Abraham was stuck waiting to receive what God had promised. He didn't have a timeline or a plan. All that there was just that promise. He was officially waitlisted. After 10 years of waiting for a promise from God, they were still learning to trust. I'm sure Abraham and Sarah felt discouraged and impatient. Discouragement can lead to doubt, and doubt can make us do some questionable things sometimes, like take matters into our own hands. In Genesis 16, we read of Sarah taking things into her own hands by telling her slave to have a baby with Abraham for them. The slave's name was Hagar, and she did end up bearing Abraham a son. His name was Ishmael. I don't know that Sarah was trying to disobey God. She probably had good intentions. She likely thought, well, I'm too old to have a baby. It doesn't make sense for God to use me, so maybe God's waiting on me to come up with another plan. Sarah may have thought that she was just helping God out, but when her plan came to fruition, it didn't only end in a baby, but it ended in jealousy. When Hagar became pregnant with a son named Ishmael, Sarah struggled with jealousy, and that jealousy led to her cruelty toward Hagar. Ultimately, Sarah's plan backfired. God had promised her tons of marshmallows. Descendants. But she didn't trust God would come through on that promise. After waiting 25 years for God's plan to come to pass, Sarah gave birth to Isaac, their promised son. But here's what's really amazing. God didn't only fulfill the promise made to Abraham and Sarah, God even showed them grace by blessing the son Abraham had fathered in disobedience. God could have punished or abandoned Abraham and Sarah, but instead God covered them in grace. It's kind of like they ate their first marshmallow, but God gave them 2 more anyway. I don't know what your promises are that God gave you that you're still waiting on, or which promises you'll need to wait for in the future, but here's what I do know. God can be trusted. And in Proverbs 3:5-7, it says this: "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil." Like Abraham and Sarah, who waited for years for God to give them a child, here's the message you and I often need to hear. God has a plan, but we might have to wait for it. So what are you waiting for? Are you waiting for something to change in your life? Are you waiting for your heart to change? Are you waiting for a new opportunity or a prayer to be answered, a problem to be solved? Waiting is often difficult, and it usually goes on for much longer than we prefer. But here's what we can learn from the story of Abraham and Sarah. While we're waiting, God can be trusted. We don't have to figure it all out. God knows the future better than we do. God's plans are better than anything we can imagine. Even when we get tired of waiting, God never gets tired of being gracious and compassionate toward us. So no matter what you're waiting for, I hope this hourglass is a reminder to you that while you wait, God can be trusted. The same God who is so patient and gracious and trustworthy to Abraham and Sarah is patient and gracious and trustworthy to you and to me. We won't always know what God wants or how long God wants us to wait, or how long we'll need to continue waiting, but we know God has a plan even if we have to wait for it. Manna students, that is the end of week 1 of Waitlisted. We would love to talk about this further with you. So if you are in one of our small groups, one of our site groups, we're gonna break up and have our group discussion now. If you're watching online, you can find all of our discussion questions below. We'll see you next week.